Hey everyone, this is Finn. I've decided to record a series of videos, kind of telling the story behind my most successful over-the-board chess tournament to date. This was the London Chess Congress at Imperial College London back in April 2022. I was initially intending to record some videos like soon after the tournament finished, but one thing got in the way and then another. And now I look back on the tournament fondly and I just partly analyze these games in a bit more detail, try and learn as much as I can from them, and also share my good experience of the tournaments. I want to now publish this series of videos and just talk through the games, talk through the journey. So I'm going to start with my round one game in the video today. I had the white pieces in this game, and it was a slightly unusual situation since I went into this game having no idea what my opponent's rating was. So I was in the under 1750 ECF section of the tournament, and with a rating of about 1550 or so at the time, I was actually one of the higher rated players in the section, but there were many unrated players. So it was very difficult to tell how I would fare against this kind of field, and I wasn't necessarily expecting to do well going into the tournament. So when I started the game, I had no idea what rating my opponent had, and although the game itself turned out to be relatively smooth, it didn't feel easy during the process. I can tell you that. So at this time, I was exclusively playing d4, so I opened with d4. My opponent played d5. I played my normal Queen's Gambit here. My opponent plays e6, so we've got a Queen's Gambit declines for the moment. Knight c3, c6, so we're getting this semi-Slav kind of Maran system from black. And I decided to play e3 in this game. I do sometimes play this Marshall Gambit with e4, but this was I remember this was a very sharp line, and I hadn't brushed up on preparation recently, so I went e3, a quieter move. And then on move 4 here, my opponent shocked me quite a bit by playing a very unusual move, g6. And this looks kind of weird because all of the pawns are on light squares. Also, black's development seems to be in danger of being on the slow side here. On my next move, I can develop another knight, for example, and it's kind of like I'm 2-0 up in terms of piece developments. And I'd simply never seen this before. And so I was trying to figure out, whether it's really bad for black or whether it's just unusual but sort of okay. And I kind of came to the conclusion that it's not that bad for black, actually. I don't think there's a really clear way to punish this. So I just proceed with normal moves, trying to develop quickly, hopefully get an edge on my opponent in the development department. My opponent follows up with bishop g7, which is obviously the whole idea of playing g6. So this was fine. And now I felt I had a choice. I feel like in this position, white doesn't necessarily want to move this light squared bishop yet, because then you might be losing a tempo when black takes on c4. So I went with another plan here, which was to play b3. And there are a couple of ideas behind this move. One of them is to just have the option of taking back the pawn on c4. One idea is to potentially just develop this bishop onto the long diagonal and sort of contest black's bishop there on that diagonal. And another plan, which I do end up coming back to a bit later on, is potentially to go bishop a3 and just try and exploit the fact that black has kind of vacated this this a3 to f8 diagonal. And I was thinking, if black is not cautious with the way she develops, there may be problems castling, there may be problems for black involving tactics against a rook on f8, for example. So I thought it was interesting to give myself the option of this bishop a3 developing move later. Okay, so my opponent plays knight d7, which makes sense. And I became slightly concerned here about the possibility of some e5 move coming up. I mean, ultimately, it can't be too scary for whites for black to open the center in this position where black is not exactly ahead in development. But I was thinking, for instance, if I follow through with my plan of developing this bishop, maybe e5 would come. And there's some complicated lines here. So, for example, I could take. I don't think my opponent wants to lose their dark square bishop here, because then my dark square bishop will just dominate. So presumably they play knight takes. And you can go knight takes, bishop takes. And I was at this sort of position in mind where white just continues developing, maybe prepares to bring rook to the d file. Part of the idea of queen c2, by the way, is also to protect the bishop on b2. And this seemed like it should be quite decent for white. But I didn't think I would necessarily have a huge advantage here. I think actually the computer suggests a slightly different line out of interest. I mean, this didn't actually happen in the game. Apparently, you can take on d5 here. And after c takes d5, you can actually wait. No, this looks kind of bad for white now. So okay, is there some idea here? No, I think to me this doesn't seem right. Should be 5. Surely you can just block this. Yeah, okay. So I'll have to double check this, but to me it seemed like this queen c2 move would be the prudent move. And yeah, maybe white is a bit better, but it's not totally clear. So actually, I felt e5 might have been the most direct and combative way to play here in this position. I decided to go bishop b2, partly to try and reinforce control of the e5 square. And again, just wanting to kind of contest black's bishop on the diagonal here. My opponent just played something completely different to what I was expecting, f5. And now we have essentially a Dutch stonewall pawn structure, except the dark square bishop has been fianchettoed. So this was a big surprise, and I guess it didn't seem scary, but I also needed to try and figure out how to deal with this very unexpected, unusual setup. So, okay, I play queen c2. I figure it's useful to have this bishop on b2 guarded unless the center does open up. My opponent played knight gf6, and now we come back to this idea that I had earlier on about bishop a3, because actually, in a sense, the knight is kind of awkward coming to f6, because on e7, the knight could have done a better job of actually blocking the diagonal. And so the trouble is, if I immediately go bishop a3 here, I believe now this move could be awkward. Queen a5, and the bishop is kind of attacked, and it looks pretty awkward to play a move like this because both my minor pieces here are kind of vulnerable, and I didn't particularly like the look of this. However, I realized that there's another way to challenge black setup here, and that is to play the move knight g5, which I played in the game. And the point is we're kind of probing this weakness on e6. And we're also, in the case of queen e7, we've essentially ensured that black no longer has queen a5 as a resource in the position. So now potentially ideas like a4, bishop a3 are going to be even stronger. So for that reason, I did wonder whether my opponent might play the move knight b6 using the bishop to defend the e6 pawn. However, the trouble is here, white will go c5, force this knight to come back. Actually, in fact, it's only got one square. And then we take on e6, and white's doing extremely well here. So actually, queen e7 is kind of forced, and my opponent played it. And now a4. So this plan of bishop a3 hitting the sensitive diagonal, potentially interfering with black's ability to castle kingside as well. So I was looking forward to potentially having a positional advantage based on the difficulty for black of getting the rooks active and getting the king to a truly safe spot. So at this point, I didn't really see how black was going to deal with this simple plan. My opponent found an interesting move here, knight g4. And this is not something that I foresaw, to be honest, before I played a4. The point is now if I go bishop a3, black just takes on g5 because my knight on g5 is hanging. So they're kind of delaying bishop a3 from coming on the board, although they can't really delay it forever. I mean, I can just move my knight back and then bishop a3 is still on the cards. So I decided to retreat with knight f3 here. I did consider the move h4, which may be good, but it feels like maybe I'm overcommitting on the king side here. And also, there will be ways for black to kick this knight with moves like h6 later. And maybe I'm not going to be happy about having this weakness on the king side, especially if my king is going to castle in that direction. So that was why I decided to go knight f3. My opponent now uses the tempo that they won to castle. And I go bishop a3 anyway, just following up on my plan to hit this sensitive diagonal, forcing the opponent to block, to avoid losing the exchange here with this, due to this skewer of the queen and rook. So they have to block this. And now we get this pawn tension in the center that you can see with the arrows. And actually, I made quite a mistake here. This is probably my biggest mistake of the game, because I played the move d takes c5, trying in a way to increase pressure on this diagonal, which sort of works. But the trouble is, by doing this, I've also seriously activated black's bishop on the long diagonal here. So it's kind of, in a sense, neither side really benefits from this exchange. Both sides suddenly get a really nice bishop. So the stronger move, I believe, is c takes d5. And the concept behind this move is that this pawn is still essentially pinned and weak. And basically, black's d5 pawn here is just hanging. Because if we play knight takes d5, black's really in quite a bit of trouble because their bishop is still not activated on the long diagonal. They've lost a pawn. We're winning a tempo against the queen. And this diagonal for my bishop remains problematic for black. So actually, this was a big oversight from me. Fortunately, it worked out because my opponent in this position after recapturing with knight takes c5, which I think is fine. I now start to realize that uh, this diagonal is a problem. I mean, my knight can't really move without giving up the bishop, so I don't, I can't immediately take on d5 and win that pawn now. So I play rook c1 to get out of the way of any issues on that diagonal. And here I think my opponent didn't realize the importance of the hanging pawn on d5. She played b6 with the idea of getting this bishop active. But I think this just doesn't quite work out for black because losing this central pawn and also, by the way, inviting a white piece onto the d5 square is just a little bit too much to give up. And white generally has a nice position here anyway, even without an extra pawn. So, okay, I play c takes d5. Yeah. And here's an interesting moment. So, to be honest, I'd also failed to fully appreciate the ramifications of the fact that my bishop on a3 is loose. So I foresaw that knight d3 check could be played, but I just thought, well, it's fine. Just take it, right? And then I realized that my opponent's idea is obviously to win the piece back by going queen takes a3. And so, to be honest, I kind of stumbled into this and was not very cautious here. But once we reached this position, I realized that white is still doing very well. We're still a pawn up. We're ready to castle. And we have very good centralized pieces, right? So all our minor pieces are nicely developed to the center. We've got this heavy piece coordination on the c file. And contrast black's pieces here, right? They're kind of weird, right? So the knight on g4 is in no man's land. The queen on a3 is really weird and decentralized. This bishop is not yet developed. The rook's not developed. The center's kind of collapsing. And so black's position is surprisingly fragile. It might look like it's only a pawn down, but I think black is really hard pressed to defend for long in this position actually. So okay, I simply castle, try and complete development here. My opponent plays e takes d5. I play knight takes d5, centralizing a piece as well. And my opponent plays bishop b7. And I guess my opponent's concept here is that they do have two rather nice bishops. So I realized I did need to be cautious about this. Also, rook c8 is now on its way. On the other hand, my opponent's king is not the safest. And this move bishop c4 highlights that fact, preparing some discoveries, and also just kind of anticipating the rook c8 move here. So this kind of course, my opponent doesn't want to walk into any discoveries, so she plays king h8. And now I have time for rook fd1, and my development's just totally strong here. Black continues to have these piece coordination problems. So I still think white is quite significantly better. I also don't think black would particularly want to, say, take on d5 and have this kind of position, simply because now black does not have the bishop pair anymore. And because white is a pawn up, I believe piece trades generally are going to be fine for whites. Not necessarily that I will seek them out actively, but it's not something that I particularly mind either in this situation. So, okay. After rook fd1, my opponent plays rook ac8, and there is a slightly annoying pin on the bishop here. And I had to think carefully in this situation because there was a strong temptation actually to play a passive kind of move. In particular, I was thinking about simply feeling uncomfortable with the pin, so I was thinking about a move like maybe Queen E2, Queen B1, stepping away from Black's rook. But then I realized that if I give Black time in this position, it's just going to allow them to solve their problems. Okay, so for example, the queen can maybe come back into play a bit more. It's actually not obvious where the queen comes back into play, but funnily enough, because these squares are all kind of pressured by my pieces right now. But maybe the knight comes back, for example, challenges the nice knight on d5. Maybe this rook just comes into the game. And I sense the danger that I could let my advantage slip if I play the position in an unduly passive way. So that is why I decided to play a more aggressive move, and I think just a better move, knight g5. So the knight, having already shuttled between g5 and f3 once, is going back. This time with far more promising rewards, though, because now the e6 square is severely weak. And already, actually, knight e6 is quite a serious positional threat, at least because I'm essentially forking the dark square bishop and the rook. And I think Black really doesn't want to lose that dark square bishop, because if you can imagine the dark square bishop going, I think Black's king would start to look really weak. So, okay, this I think put a lot of pressure on Black's position. My opponent played an interesting move here, one which I anticipated, Queen d6. And there are a few ideas. So first of all, just bringing the queen back into play. But most threateningly, of course, they're now threatening queen takes h2, which, of course, White needs to be very careful about this. This also fixes some of Black's coordination issues, because at least now the queen and the knight are sort of working together. And I think, finally, another idea behind the move is to guard the e6 square. So I thought this was the best move for Black, but I also foresaw this pretty nice response from White, knight f4. Okay, so first of all, blocking the queen takes h2 threats. And second of all, kind of unveiling my rook on the d file here. Kind of asking Black's queen where she wants to go. It's not so obvious where it makes sense. And moreover, look at all of the pieces like bearing down on e6 now. So it really seems inevitable that White will entrench a minor piece onto that square at some point. Okay, so Black continues trying to play aggressively with the move Queen c6. Now just threatening mate in 1 on g2. And so, yeah, this kind of seemed like an active idea for Black, and I think she was right to try to get counterplay for the pawn, which, yeah, while it's still possible to do so. Now, this position, I think, does require some careful handling for White, because Black's counterplay is real. And actually, this next move, a quiet move, was the move of the game that I was most proud of, Queen d2. And I can explain a few ideas behind this move. First of all, just allowing the bishop to move. So this is useful for many reasons. Firstly, for control of e6, potentially for some knight f7 ideas that could be coming up. It's not entirely clear that White wants to go for this immediately, but yeah, I think it might actually be a serious threat right now, because after knight f7, king g8, there will be some discoveries like knight e5, for example, potentially winning the queen. So unpinning the bishop is definitely handy. Also, I felt that black's rook would really like to contest the d file or activate itself on the d file, which now is not possible because I just take it, and after rook takes, rook takes. So I'm actually double attacking the d8 square right now. This is another point of the move. And finally, yeah, I mentioned about the bishop being now able to move. It's also very important, of course, that my rook on c1 is defended twice, because otherwise it would not be a true alleviation of this pin. So it feels like a very crazy position, but actually this quiet move just keeps white in control and makes sure that black is not going to have serious counterplay, in my view. Okay, so black played the move queen c7, trying to meet the threats of knight f7. So now, if I did play knight f7, black could just take this, and this would not be good for white at all. I mean, now black's bishops really are vindicated and super strong, and I'm sure black would be better in this position. So queen c7 makes sense in that way, but now knight e6 comes and we're just forking these heavy pieces, and black is really in trouble. So it's actually really difficult to suggest a move for black after queen d2, and that's why queen d2 is the move in the game that I'm most proud of. So essentially, I don't think there's a way to guard f7 adequately without losing to knight e6. It's one of these this knight g knight coming to e6. So for example, you can also play rook c7 trying to guard this, but then you have the same issue here. So I think black is just losing in this position so far as I can tell. Okay, so queen c7, knight g e6. Not wanting to move this knight, of course, because this would allow queen takes h2 and a bit of a disaster. So knight g e6 happens. My opponent plays queen e7, just saving the queen. I take the exchange here. Knight takes f8, rook takes f8. I mean, I don't think white has to take the exchange, but it seemed like the simplest way to convert the position, and also I can still come into e6 later with a piece if I want to, even with the knight. So this seemed cleanest. I was starting to run really quite low on time in this position. I think I had about 10 to 15 minutes with 30-second increments. And this move actually was a bit on the reckless side. Turns out to be sound, but probably wasn't the most prudent idea. And the reason is I played queen d7 here. And essentially I was kind of trying to go for a quick kill because I'm essentially trying to force off either black's light square bishop or the queen. And also just trying to essentially dominate the center of the board, infiltrate into black's position. If I can get a rook to the 7th in this position, I'll be very happy. And I was thinking the queen trades also favors me because I've got a huge material edge right now, and I also don't want black to get any counterplay. However, after queen h4, it was a little scary, right? Because there are quite a few attackers around my king. But I tried to calculate it all out, and I realized that I can allow black to take on h2 in this position because a couple of reasons. Firstly, because after queen takes b7, my queen is able to come back to defend the king side. And secondly, just because after queen takes h2, king f1, queen and knight are in the attack, but they can't make progress on their own. And it's too difficult for black to bring in these other pieces because the white pieces are just too well centralized in this position. So this position I judge to be safe, although white definitely has to be careful. So black played queen h1 check. Probably not a good move, by the way, because after king e2, now the queen is hanging and black has essentially lost time here. Queen h4, okay, targeting f2. And okay, need to be kind of cautious here because move like queen f3 maybe it's possible, but then there's some annoying ideas like this maybe, and essentially, you know, the blacks still got some sort of attacking chances. So I was looking for a tactical solution here to meet this threat of queen takes f2. And I was very happy with the move that I found, knight takes g6 check. And the idea here is simple. I mean, okay, we're sacking knights, but the h file is now open, and we're essentially winning black's queen by force. Okay, so h takes g6 is forced, rook h1, and it's basically game over here because if black tries to block the attack on the queen, there's actually this really nice move, queen c7. And we're simply picking up the knight, which can't be defended. Bishop e5, not possible because of queen takes e5. And again, you can see how these pieces are essentially unable to get into the game in a meaningful way. Okay, so black actually tried queen h7 here. And the game doesn't go on too much longer now after rook takes h7, king takes, rook h1 check, just trying to force the black pieces into a more passive square, so knight h6. And I just start taking material here because I felt there's no danger in my position. Rook f6, rook d1, knight g4 was played. Black's trying to get active, but now after rook d7, my opponent resigned because actually there's no way to save the bishop on g7. So that was how the game ended. I was really satisfied to get this win because, as I said, I had no idea how I was going to match up against the competition in this tournament. I didn't know my opponent's rating. It turned out my opponent's rating was quite a bit lower than mine, around 1100, but still, the game was, I think, quite complex and required very careful handling from the white side, so I didn't find it to be an easy win at all. I think, to me, one of the most interesting positions in the game, the part where I could nearly have let things slip, was in the position after black plays rook c8. So I think the old Finn probably would have gone for some passive move like queen e2 or queen b1, and then I think you know, the task to win is significantly trickier. Actually, I think this knight g5 idea, infiltrating this weakness, is a much stronger one, and as we saw in the game, it's very tricky for black to meet this threat, especially while white's pieces are really nicely centralized and black still has these coordination issues. So it did require some careful calculation after queen d6, knight f4. But yeah, from here onwards, I felt, especially after queen d2, I felt like black didn't have much chance to hold. All right, I hope that was interesting. It's a game recap for everyone. So yeah, managed to get a win in the first round and was feeling very optimistic about the rest of the tournament. All right. Well, take care for now. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.